This is how a girl destroyed my friend's life by calling him a rapist. I still remember the night it all began. The night that changed my friend Elias forever. We were sitting in his living room, the soft hum of rain tapping against the window, two friends laughing over a card game. Everything felt calm, familiar, safe. I had no idea that by the next morning, his life would collapse in ways neither of us could imagine. Elias had always been the most logical person I knew, the kind who thought before he spoke, who planned his future like it was an equation. He believed love wasn't something to rush into. A relationship only makes sense when you can stand on your own 2 feet, he used to say. That was his rule, stability before emotion. And that belief, as reasonable as it sounded, would become the spark that set off everything that followed. Across the street lived a girl named Clara, his neighbor's niece. She was beautiful, confident, and warm when she wanted to be. But there was a restlessness in her, an intensity that went deeper than anyone realized. She liked Elias more than liked him. She admired him, maybe even loved him. But it wasn't the quiet kind of love you keep in your heart. It was the kind that demanded to be seen, answered, returned. She would find reasons to visit him, to linger around when we were hanging out. I noticed how her eyes followed him, how she laughed a little too hard at his jokes. Elias was kind but distant. He respected her, but he didn't feel the same. He told me once, "She's sweet, Noah, but I can't pretend, not now. I need to focus on building my life first." That night, while we played cards, the door creaked open. Clara stood there in the dim light, her expression unreadable. Her hair was damp from the drizzle, and her voice trembled when she spoke. "If I can't have you," she said, "no one will." I remember laughing nervously, thinking it was some dramatic joke. Elias looked uneasy, though. "Clara," he said softly, "that's not something to say lightly." She gave a small smile, one that didn't reach her eyes, and walked away. The door closed behind her, and the sound echoed strangely in the quiet room. We both shrugged it off. "She's emotional," I said. "It'll pass." Elias nodded, but he didn't look convinced. He sat in silence for a moment, staring at the cards on the table as if they could give him answers. The next morning, I walked with him toward the bus stop. Clara was there again, waiting at the corner, her arms crossed. Elias sighed, told me to go ahead, and walked over to her. I stayed a few paces behind, pretending to check my phone. Their voices were low, but I could hear enough. Elias was being calm, trying to set boundaries. He told her she needed to stop showing up everywhere, that it was making things difficult. When she wouldn't listen, he said, "Clara, if this continues, I'll have to take it seriously. Please don't make this harder than it already is." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't reply. She turned and walked away quickly, disappearing down the street. That afternoon, everything changed. Elias's father called me, his voice furious and confused. "Do you know what your friend did?" he shouted. I had no idea what he meant. When I ran to their house, the police were already there. Elias stood in the yard, pale and silent, while 2 officers questioned his father. Clara's uncle, their neighbor, was yelling something about his niece, his face red with anger. I couldn't understand what was happening until one of the officers told Elias to put his hands behind his back. My stomach dropped. I wanted to speak up, to ask what he'd done, but Elias just looked at me. That blank, frozen look of someone who's just seen his world fall apart. They took him away like he was an object, not a person. His father slapped him before the officers could even drive off. "What have you done?" he shouted. Elias didn't respond. He didn't even defend himself. That night I couldn't sleep. My mother, who worked as a magistrate, noticed my silence at dinner. When I told her what had happened, she frowned deeply. "If the accusation is real, there will be evidence," she said. "But if not, that girl just destroyed a man's future." She promised she would look into it. Days passed. The neighborhood buzzed with rumors. No one wanted to hear the truth. People rarely do. Even after all our years of friendship, I started to question everything. Not because I doubted Elias, but because the world around me did. Everyone looked at him differently now. His name had already been dragged through the mud, and no apology could fix that. Then, one evening, my mother came home with a heavy expression. "The girl confessed," she said. She admitted she lied. She said she wanted him to notice her, that she never thought it would go this far. I remember standing there in silence, unable to process it. Relief and rage crashed together in my chest. My friend had been humiliated, broken, and nearly destroyed. For nothing. When Elias was released, I went to see him. He looked like someone who had aged 10 years in a few days. His eyes were empty, his voice flat. "It doesn't matter anymore," he said quietly. "People will always believe what they want to believe. He wasn't wrong. The truth doesn't erase the damage. The lie had already done its work." That night, Elias packed his things and left home. His father didn't stop him. He just stood there in silence as Elias walked away, bag over his shoulder, disappearing into the dark street. Before he left, he looked at me and said, "I'll rebuild myself, Noah. I'll rise again, but I'll never forget this." And that was the last time I saw him as the person I used to know. That night, something inside him broke, and something else began to grow in its place. That was the night everything changed. When Elias left his father's house, it felt like the entire neighborhood went silent. People didn't talk about him openly anymore, but you could still feel it in the air. That invisible tension whenever his name was mentioned. It was as if everyone had quietly agreed to erase him, like pretending he never existed would somehow make their own guilt lighter. But I couldn't do that. I couldn't just let him disappear. At first, he stayed in touch. He would send me short, emotionless texts. "Found a small room. Got a job. Don't tell anyone where I am." They were sentences stripped of warmth, like messages written by someone trying to survive, not to live. I visited him a few times, and every time I did, I saw how much he'd changed. His new place was small and dimly lit. One bed, one table, one window that barely opened. It smelled faintly of oil and rain. He had found work at a mechanic's shop on the edge of town. The owner was a quiet man who didn't ask questions, and Elias liked that. He told me once, "Machines don't judge you, Noah. They break, you fix them. That's all there is." It sounded practical, but there was something dark underneath. He wasn't fixing cars. He was hiding behind them. Every time I saw him, I noticed new signs of the storm brewing inside. He spoke less, slept less, smiled never. There were nights when I'd drop by after work and find him sitting in silence, staring at the floor. The same song looping softly on his old radio. He didn't have to say anything. The silence said it all. The world had branded him something he wasn't, and even though the truth had come out, no one seemed to care. I tried to help. I told him he should move on, start fresh somewhere far away, but he just shook his head. "You can't outrun a stain like this," he said quietly. "Even if people forget, I'll still remember." Sometimes I caught glimpses of the old Elias, the one who used to make plans, who believed in logic and patience. But those moments never lasted. One evening, we sat by the window of his tiny room, watching the rain trail down the glass. He said something that chilled me. "Do you ever think about balance, Noah? How the world takes from you and never gives back until you force it to?" I didn't like where that thought was heading. "You don't need balance, Elias," I said. "You need peace." He smiled faintly, that bitter kind of smile that hurts more than tears. "Peace is for the innocent," he said. After that night, our conversations grew shorter. I'd text him and sometimes get no reply. When I did, it was always the same. "Busy. I'm fine." Don't worry about me. But I did worry, because I knew what silence can do to a man. It doesn't heal. It rots. Months passed. Life went on for everyone else. The gossip faded, replaced by new stories, new distractions. But for Elias, the clock had stopped. He was frozen in that one terrible moment, reliving it over and over. Then, one rainy afternoon, I ran into him by accident. I almost didn't recognize him at first. He looked older, harder. His eyes were sharper, his voice quieter, but his presence felt heavier somehow. We sat at a small cafe near the station, and for the first time in a long while, he talked. "I've been studying," he said. "Law, psychology, trying to understand people, trying to understand how someone can destroy another person's life with just a few words." He wasn't angry when he said it, and that scared me more than if he had been. There was something unsettling in his calmness, like a storm that had learned how to stay quiet until it decided to strike. That same week, I saw something that made my heart stop. It was raining again. It always seemed to rain when their paths crossed. And as I walked down the street near the marketplace, I saw Elias standing perfectly still. Across from him, holding a broken umbrella, was Clara. It had been almost a year since the lie that ruined him. She looked different now, pale, tired, her confidence gone. She called his name softly. "Elias," she said. "I know you hate me." He didn't reply. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she continued, her voice trembling. "I've lost everything because of what I did. My family doesn't talk to me. My uncle won't even look at me. I can't sleep knowing what I caused." The look on Elias's face was unreadable. No anger, no pity, just exhaustion. "You should go," he said finally. "There's nothing left to say." Clara nodded slowly, eyes wet with regret. "I know," she whispered. "I just needed to see you, to tell you how sorry I am." Then she walked away, her figure fading into the rain like a ghost. Elias stood there for a long time, motionless, watching her disappear. When I approached him, he didn't seem surprised to see me. He just said quietly, "She destroyed my life. And now she's destroyed hers. What does that make us, Noah? Victims or reflections?" I didn't have an answer. That night I went to check on him. He was sitting by the window, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "Do you think forgiveness exists?" he asked me suddenly. "Yes," I said. "But it takes time." He shook his head. "Forgiveness is for people who still believe the world is fair." Then he looked at me, and for the first time, I saw how tired he was. Not just physically, but deep in his soul. I'm not angry anymore, he said. But I'm not free either. The lie is gone, but it's still living inside me. That sentence broke me, because I understood exactly what he meant. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It just changes the shape of your prison. And that was when I realized something terrible. Elias wasn't just fighting the world anymore. He was fighting himself. There's a moment in every story where silence turns dangerous, when grief stops being quiet and begins to burn. For Elias, that moment came slowly, like a storm gathering over weeks, invisible at first, but impossible to stop once it began. I noticed the change in small things, the way he stopped replying to my messages, the way his voice grew flatter like he'd forgotten how to care, the spark in his eyes, the one that used to light up when we talked about the future. It was gone. He wasn't angry anymore, not even bitter. He was just hollow, and somehow that was worse. I'd go by his apartment sometimes. He'd always leave the door unlocked, but he'd barely talk. I'd find him sitting at his desk, surrounded by books on law, psychology, and human behavior. His notes were a maze of questions and theories, pages filled with sentences like, "Why do people destroy what they can't have?" Or, "How does one rebuild trust after betrayal?" It wasn't studying. It was obsession. He once told me, "If I can understand why she did it, maybe I can stop hating her." But every answer he found only led to more anger. He was dissecting pain with logic, trying to reason with something that was never rational to begin with. Then one night he called me. It was almost midnight. His voice was quiet, but I could tell something was wrong. "Can you come?" he said. That was all. When I arrived, the room was dark, except for the flicker of a single candle. The air smelled faintly of rain, again. Elias was sitting by the window, still wearing his work uniform. His hands were trembling. "She came again," he said. It took me a second to understand who he meant. "She showed up outside the shop," he continued. Didn't say much. Just stood there. I ignored her, but when I looked up again, she was gone. He paused. "I don't even know if she was really there." His voice cracked on that last word. That's when I realized how deep the damage had gone. Clara didn't need to haunt him physically. Her shadow already lived inside his mind. I told him he needed rest, maybe counseling, something. He laughed quietly. "You really think a therapist can fix what people did to me?" I didn't answer. He got up suddenly and opened the window, letting in the cold wind. "I'm tired, Noah," he said softly. "Tired of proving I'm innocent. Tired of pretending it doesn't matter. Everyone moved on, but I'm still here, still frozen in that moment." I wanted to tell him that things would get better, but I didn't believe it myself. He turned to me then, eyes glistening in the candlelight. "You ever feel like the truth came too late?" I nodded slowly. He smiled faintly. "Yeah, too late to fix what it broke." That night, he didn't sleep. I stayed with him just in case. He sat there for hours staring at nothing. When the sun finally rose, he looked at me and said, "I'm done hiding." The next day, he went back to his old neighborhood, the place that had cast him out. I begged him not to, but he didn't listen. He needed to face it. When he arrived, people stopped what they were doing. The same neighbors who had whispered about him a year ago now stood frozen, unsure what to say. Elias didn't shout. He didn't accuse anyone. He just walked through the streets slowly, letting them see him, alive, calm, unbroken. It wasn't vengeance. It was something else. A silent confrontation. Then, without a word, he walked up to the house across the street, Clara's uncle's home. The same place where the lie began. He knocked once. When the door opened, the old man froze. Elias didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "I forgive your niece. I hope one day she forgives herself." Then he turned and left. I'll never forget the look on that man's face, a mix of guilt and disbelief. That night, when Elias came back, he looked different. Peaceful almost, but I could tell he wasn't free yet. Forgiving someone doesn't end the pain. It just means you've decided to stop letting it control you. He sat down and told me what had happened. I listened in silence. When he finished, he said something I'll never forget. "You know, Noah," he began, "I used to think my life ended that day. But maybe that was just the end of who I used to be. Maybe this pain is the beginning of something else." I didn't realize it then, but that was the start of his slow climb out of the darkness. Still, the days that followed weren't easy. Forgiveness might sound noble, but it's messy. It doesn't erase the scars or stop the memories. Elias began writing again, pages and pages of thoughts, reflections, and plans. It was his way of processing everything. Sometimes he'd read a line out loud. They took my name, but they didn't take my soul. He even started helping out at a local youth center, fixing things, teaching kids how to repair old bikes. The same hands that once trembled with anger now built things again. But every now and then, when the nights were quiet, I'd see him look out the window with that same distant stare. The kind you get when you're remembering something you'll never forget. No matter how hard you try, he wasn't healed yet. But he was no longer lost, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a glimpse of hope. Faint, fragile, but real, Because sometimes, before you can be free, you have to break completely. That was Elias's breaking point. It's strange how healing never happens the way you expect. You think one grand act of forgiveness will set you free, that you'll wake up one morning and the weight will be gone. But it doesn't work like that. It's not one moment. It's 1,000 quiet choices you make every day. I learned that from watching Elias. After his visit to the neighborhood, something in him shifted. He wasn't the same broken man who sat in darkness trying to understand why people could be so cruel. He still carried the scars, yes, but he had stopped letting them define him. It was like he'd finally realized that the only way to win against the past was to refuse to let it control the present. He began to live differently. He woke up early, went to work, came home, and read late into the night. But the difference wasn't in what he did, it was in how he did it. There was purpose again in his actions, something steady and grounded. The bitterness that once sat behind every word was fading. I could hear it in his voice when we talked. He laughed again sometimes, small and quiet, but real. One afternoon, he called me out of the blue. "I want to see my father," he said. I was silent for a moment. That was the one bridge I thought he'd never cross. His father had been the first person to turn his back on him, the one whose disbelief had hurt most. "Are you sure?" I asked. He sighed. "If I'm going to move forward, I need to stop hating him. I don't want to carry that weight anymore." A few days later, I went with him. The old house looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe because we'd both grown. Or maybe because pain has a way of shrinking the places it used to live. When his father opened the door, the air turned heavy. For a second, no one spoke. Then Elias said, "Hi, Dad." The old man didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked between us, confused, guarded, almost frightened. Finally, he stepped aside. "Come in," he said. The silence inside the house was louder than words. The furniture hadn't changed, but the warmth was gone. Elias sat across from his father at the same kitchen table where they'd once eaten breakfast together. I stood back, letting them talk. "I don't blame you anymore," Elias said after a long pause. "You believed what you heard because it was easier than believing in me. I understand that now." His father's eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong," he said. "I should have trusted you. I was scared, Elias. I didn't know what to do." Elias nodded slowly. "Neither did I." They talked for hours after that. Not just about the past, but about everything they'd both lost by letting pride and pain drive them apart. When we left that night, I could see the lightness in Elias's face, the kind that comes only from release. Forgiving him wasn't for him, he told me as we walked down the street. It was for me. That was the first time I truly understood what redemption looks like. Not the kind that makes everything right again, but the kind that lets you breathe without anger in your lungs. Weeks turned into months. Elias began volunteering more often at the youth center. The kids loved him. They saw something in him that adults often missed. Maybe it was his quiet strength, or maybe they sensed that he understood what it meant to fall and get back up. He taught them how to fix bicycles, how to keep going when things got hard, how to believe in themselves when no one else did. One day I visited him there. He was crouched beside a boy, helping him reattach a loose chain on a bike. The kid was talking about how everyone at school laughed at him for being slow in class. Elias smiled and said, "They laughed at me too once, but one day, they'll wish they hadn't." Then he looked up at me and winked. It was a small thing, but in that moment I realized he wasn't just healing. He was helping others heal too, but healing doesn't mean forgetting. There were still nights when I caught him staring into space, lost in thoughts he never shared. Once, when I asked what he was thinking, he said softly, "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if none of it had ever occurred. But then again, maybe I needed it to become who I am now." I didn't know whether to agree or cry. Then something unexpected happened. A letter arrived for Elias. It was from Clara. She had moved to another city, started therapy, and was trying to rebuild her life. In the letter, she wrote that she still carried the guilt, that she didn't expect forgiveness, but wanted him to know she was trying to make things right, by helping others who had been unfairly accused or misunderstood. It was her way of giving back, of atoning in silence. Elias read the letter quietly, his eyes scanning every line. When he finished, he folded it neatly and placed it on the table. "She's finally doing something good," he said. His voice wasn't cold or resentful. It was soft, reflective, almost proud. "Maybe that's enough," he didn't write back. He didn't need to. Sometimes peace isn't a conversation, it's acceptance. That night, we sat on his rooftop under the fading orange sky. For the first time in a long while, he looked peaceful. "You know, Noah," he said, "I used to think my life was over. But maybe that lie didn't destroy me. It revealed me. It showed me who I really am." I looked at him, the man he'd become after all the pain, and I realized he was right. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. Stronger, wiser, quieter, but alive in a way he hadn't been before. "Do you think people ever really change?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "No," he said. They just finally become who they were meant to be. The wind was cool that evening, and for the first time in what felt like years, we both laughed. Not out of relief or irony, but out of something purer. Hope. Time has a way of softening even the hardest memories. When I look back now, it's strange to think how far we've come from that night, the night when everything fell apart. Sometimes I still hear the echo of it, the sound of rain against the window, the uncertainty in Elias's voice. But the pain isn't sharp anymore. It's more like an old scar, still there, still visible, but no longer hurting. Years have passed since then. Elias still works with his hands, still reads late at night, still carries himself with that quiet determination that used to make him seem older than he was. But now there's something different in his eyes. Not anger, not sorrow, but peace. The kind of peace that comes only when you've walked through the fire and made it out alive. He didn't become rich or famous. He didn't chase revenge or try to prove the world wrong. Instead, he chose something far more powerful: simplicity, purpose, and integrity. He turned the pain that once consumed him into something that could help others. The youth center, where he started volunteering, eventually made him a coordinator. Kids come there from all kinds of broken situations. Some victims of bullying, some struggling with guilt or loneliness, some just trying to find direction. And Elias listens to them. Really listens. He doesn't talk much about his past, but every lesson he gives carries pieces of it. About patience, about endurance, about how truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits. I visit him often. The place has become brighter since he started there. There are colorful bikes stacked by the walls, laughter echoing from the small workshop. And whenever I see him surrounded by those kids, explaining how a loose bolt can ruin an entire frame, I realize he's not teaching them mechanics. He's teaching them resilience. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I watched him walk a young boy home. The kid had been caught stealing from a local store. Elias didn't scold him. He just talked quietly, like he was guiding his younger self. When they reached the corner, Elias placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "What you did was wrong, but it doesn't make you wrong. The world will try to convince you that one mistake defines you. Don't let it." Later, when he came back, I told him that was the same advice he'd needed years ago. He smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe I was waiting for someone to say it back then. Since no one did, I'll say it for others." That's what redemption looked like for him. Not an apology, not revenge, but becoming the person he once needed. A few months later, something unexpected happened. The local community center held a charity event, and they invited Clara to speak. She had rebuilt her life in another city, working with organizations that supported both victims and those falsely accused. She spoke softly, honestly, about regret, accountability, and the heavy cost of lies. I was there, sitting at the back of the room, watching. Elias was, too. She didn't know he'd come. When her speech ended, there was a long silence, not judgmental but thoughtful. Then, as she stepped off the stage, she saw him. Their eyes met across the room. No words, no gestures, just a shared, quiet understanding. Later, when I asked him what he'd felt in that moment, he said, "Nothing painful, just gratitude that it's finally over." And it was, not because she had changed the past, but because he had stopped living inside it. That night, as we walked home, Elias told me something I'll never forget. "You know, Noah, people think redemption is about being forgiven. It's not. It's about forgiving yourself, about accepting that you can't control how others see you, only who you choose to become after the storm." We stopped at the old bridge just outside town, the same one where he used to sit during his darkest nights. The river beneath shimmered under the streetlights, calm now, steady. Elias leaned on the railing, looking down at the reflection of the stars. "This used to be the place where I came to escape," he said quietly. "Now it's the place where I remind myself that I survived." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to add. The silence spoke louder than words. Before we left, he turned to me and smiled. Not the kind of smile that hides pain, but the genuine kind that comes from peace, finally earned. "You know," he said, "I used to think I'd lost everything that night, but if that hadn't happened, maybe I'd never have found myself." He looked back at the river one last time, then added, "Maybe some storms don't come to destroy us. Maybe they come to clear the path." And in that moment, I realized that his story, the one I'd been watching unfold for years, wasn't about tragedy anymore. It was about rebirth, about how truth, though often buried, never really dies. It just waits, patiently, quietly, for the strength to be seen again. Now, whenever I think about Elias, I don't think about the pain or the injustice. I think about the quiet man at the youth center, fixing bicycles, teaching children not to give up on themselves. I think about his laughter, his calm, his faith that light always finds a way through darkness. His story became more than a memory. It became a lesson That no lie, no betrayal, no mistake has the power to define who you truly are, and every time I tell it, I end it the same way he would have. The truth survived. And so did he.